Hello and good morning. I hope you all are fine. So, in the last clip, I talked about T.E. Hume and T.S. Eliot, and today I'm going to talk about two more new critics, and they are I.A.Richards and F.R.Leavis. So, let me begin with I.A.Richards first. You all know that he was a major literary theorist of the early 20th century. Then there is a critic, George Watson. About Richards, he says that his claim to have pioneered Anglo-American new criticism of the 30s and 40s is unassailable. Fine. Then you know that I.A. Richards, he provided the theoretical foundations on which the technique of verbal analysis was built. So this is the first achievement of I.A. Richards. Means he provided the theoretical foundations, and on these theoretical foundations, the technique of verbal analysis was built. Fine. Then his two major works are Principles of Literary Criticism, which came out in 1924, and Practical Criticism, and it came out in 1929. Now try to understand I.A. Richards as a critic. See, as a critic, Richards he uses psychology to analyze the nature of literature and how it affects the human mind. Fine. So he uses psychology to analyze the nature of literature, and at the same time he tries to see how it affects the human mind. Now, mind, according to I.A. Richards, it is a system of impulses. We have a number of impulses in our minds. Fine. Now, what is an impulse? See, an impulse, it is the response of mind to a stimulus with a tendency to action. Fine. Now you know that our mind is not in a state of poise. Why? Because it is always agitated and stirred by a number of impulses. And you know that we have a number of impulses in our minds, and these impulses they always keep working, and that's why our mind is never in a state of poise, simply because it is always agitated by these impulses. Now, I. Richards feels that the greatest value of poetry is in its ability to organize the impulses and create a state of poise in mind. I hope it is clear, to all of you. See here, let me clarify that I. Richards uses the word poetry as an inclusive term for all types of literature as a whole. Fine. Then, in each work, Principles of Literary Criticism, Richards shows a distinction between two uses of language. The first one is, the scientific language, and the other one is the emotive language, right? Now he says that scientific language is referential, but on the other hand, emotive language is connotative, right? He further says that science uses words literally, and poetry, on the other hand, uses words figuratively. I mean, figures of speech you can find in the poetic language. Now, say for example, the object toad or the word toad. Let us talk about the word toad. So this word toad to a scientist, or let me say to a zoologist, it refers to the object toad, with some rough skin and maybe some poisonous glands also, right? So to a scientist, this word toad, it refers to the object. Fine. But Toad in Larkin's poem, it is a symbol of monotony of daily life. It is a symbol of monotony of daily work, and it also refers to the boredom of the day-to-day life. Is that clear? So this distinction, I mean, it is like the distinction made by Paul Deman between the literal and the figural in language. Fine. So poetry uses words for a different purpose. I think this is very clear to all of you. So words in place of referring directly to an object, they evoke emotions. And I.A.Richards calls such use of words emotive. Fine. Then further in the same book, he points out some more differences between the scientific language and the poetic language. He says that science makes statements while poetry makes pseudo statements. Now try to understand, a statement states something which is justified by its truth. But a pseudo statement, it is not literally true. Why? Because its primary purpose is to evoke an emotion of mind or to evoke emotions of mind. Fine. So for I.A.Richards, poetry has an aesthetic as well as a moral value. Now he talks about two types of impulses in human mind, though there are a number of impulses in human mind, but he talks about two particular types of impulses in human mind, right? Appetences and aversions. Appetences are desires, and aversions are dislikes, right? So this is a common fact basically. There may be some, there may be some feelings of liking and there may be some feelings of disliking in our mind. Fine. So he talks about two, types of impulses in human mind, um, appetences and aversions. Fine. Now you'll find that mind always prefers appetences to aversions. It means mind always prefers desires to dislikes. Fine. Now you'll find that normal human mind's desires to be satisfied are purely biological needs like eating, drinking, sleeping, and having different types of pleasures. Is that clear? But Richards feels that literature is an elevating desire which produces a happy poise and it results in uplifting experience. Getting my point? So it simply means that, what I.A. Richards is trying to do in criticism. He's trying to turn this criticism into a science, right? Then, in his another book that is Practical Criticism, I.A. Richards basically, he attempted to create a new kind of reading habit. Now, what he did for it? At Cambridge University, he conducted a series of experiments, and he did it by giving a few poems without the names of their authors to his students, and he gave these poems to his students for their comments or just to see their power of literary appreciation, right? The results were very shocking, or you just can say the results were very horrifying. Magazine poets, they were absolutely praised, or you just can say magazine poets were extravagantly praised. And serious poets like Dunn, Hopkins, and Christina Rossetti, they were disliked. So every felicity was ridiculed and every absurdity was praised. I hope you are getting the point. So a selection of these comments, they were called protocols. A selection of these comments by different students, they were called protocols. Fine. And these protocols, they form the contents of the book. Is that clear? So the fact is that I.A.Richards, he is trying to turn this criticism into science. Fine. Then I.A.Richards, he was also a pioneer in the investigation of the problem of meaning. If you remember, he wrote a book and he wrote it in collaboration with C.K. Ogden, and the book was The Meaning of Meaning. Fine. Now, in this book, they both highlighted an important distinction between the use of words in scientific and factual writing and the way a poet employs them. Right? So, in a poem, again, the same thing. In a poem, words have an evocative function, and they are not concerned with limited and indirect references. Fine. So the greatest achievement of I.A.Richards as a critic is that, he turned criticism into a science. Fine. I hope I.A.Richards is clear to you people. Now let me sail towards, F.R.Leavis. So the next critic is F.R.Leavis. Fine. And you know that F.R.Leavis, he's also a major force in the 20th century literary criticism, right? I hope you remember that F.R.Leavis founded a quarterly review, Scrutiny, and it was from 1932 to 1953. Now this review, according to some of its fellow critics, it contained some of the sharpest close readings of their time, and at the same time it also contained a minute and brilliant examination of actual passages. Right. Now if you try to have a look at F.R.Leavis as a critic, you'll find that like T.S. Eliot, Lewis also did not restrict himself to the layman squeezer school of criticism. And in fact, he was a verbal analyst. And as a verbal analyst, he viewed criticism as an educative process that promoted human living and culture. Right? So the main thing is that he was a verbal analyst and he viewed criticism as an educative process that promoted human living and culture. Fine. Then Lewis feels that literature is not merely words that suggest more than it states, or language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree, as Ezra Pound said. Fine. So to him, literature is not merely words. At the same time, it is not language loaded with meaning to the utmost possible degree. To him, it is the storehouse of recorded values. So the main focus of F.R.Leavis is on the recorded values. Fine. Now you'll find that he was a moral critic who insisted that you know who insisted that literary artists should be authentic when while communicating the consciousness of his times for the benefit of readers. Fine. Now, like Eliot, Lewis basically he combined verbal analysis with moral concern, and to him, literature is not meant for mere entertainment. The purpose of literature is not to provide pleasure or entertainment or to please people. The text should have a special purpose. It may be a social purpose, it may have a moral purpose, or it may have an educative purpose. Fine. So, We can say that his reading of the text, it is not an end in itself. Fine. He has some moral, social, and cultural expectations from the artist to be fulfilled in the text. So, he wanted an artist to fulfill certain social, cultural, and moral expectations while writing a text. And he feels that a critic has to evaluate it for the good of his readers. Fine. Then he feels that literary criticism, it should not only focus on the artist's technique, but it should also focus on its art's moral values or its relevance to the sensibility of the age. Fine. So the purpose of literary criticism is it is not to focus just on the technique of an artist or on the moral values of art, but a critic or criticism has to evaluate the sensibility of the age. Fine. Then if you remember in the great tradition, uh, you know, F.R.Leavis includes only five novelists with the great tradition of English fiction. And they are Jane Austen, George Eliot, Joseph Conrad, Henry James, and N.T.H. Lawrence. Right. So Lewis feels that these authors they promote human awareness of the possibilities of life. Right. So, for F.R. Leavis, literature is a contemplation of human life, human life. And these five, fiction writers, they promote human awareness of the possibilities of life. So it simply means that for Lewis, literature is a contemplation of human life. Fine. And like Eliot, he believed that literary criticism is the common pursuit of true judgment, and a critic's task, a critic's business is inevitably collaborative. So this is something about F.R. Leavis. I hope both the critics are clear to you. Now in the next clip, I'll be coming with two or three more critics. Thank you and have a good day.